Welcome to the National Museum of the American Indians new series, Youth in Action, Conversations About Our Future. Thank you for joining us. This series highlights the work of Native youth, activists, and change makers working towards equity and social justice for Indigenous people. In today's conversation, we will be focusing on Native civic engagement. My name is Jem Shondine Labarda. I'm Diné, and I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation. I'm also a cultural interpreter here at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. I would like to gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities that make their home here today. Let's get started. As a nation, we celebrate the right to vote. Just this month, we celebrated two major milestones, one being the 100th year anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote, and the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibits racial discrimination in voting. While the 19th Amendment guaranteed women the right to vote, the same rights were not extended to all Native Americans until 50 years later. Native Americans were granted citizenship in the United States with the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. Despite being American citizens, the majority of Native American voters didn't get the right to vote in federal elections, such as presidential elections, until 1970, following amendments that were made to the Voting Rights Act. Even with these gains, attempts to disenfranchise the Native vote continues today. Barriers such as voter ID laws and lack of access to sufficient polling locations continues to impact Native communities. Yet, Native citizens continue to play a critical role in local, state, tribal, and federal elections. With this being an election year, we wanted to have a conversation around Native civic engagement, which can take many forms, and we wanted to explore the impact of barriers to voting and what it means in Native American communities. Now, I would like to introduce our two guests here today to speak about their work around Native civic engagement. Isabel Coronado is a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation and a policy entrepreneur at the Next 100. At the Next 100, Isabel has focused her energy on creating policy that is aimed at reducing the generational cycle of incarceration among Native communities. Next, we have Shondine Herrera. Shondine is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and is from Monument Valley, Utah. She holds a bachelor's degree in public policy from Duke and is doing important work on the Navajo Nation. Having worked with these two young women on this webinar series, I can say that I'm very excited to highlight their work and what they're doing today during our program. I would like to invite Isabel to tell us a little bit more about herself.
Hishtay, my name is Isabel Coronado. I am a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation that's located in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, our headquarters. I'm also a policy entrepreneur with the Next 100, where I focus on criminal justice reform, especially in Native communities, and especially focusing on children of incarcerated parents. In this photo right here, this is my crew. This is my teammates from Next 100. We're a progressive think tank for the next generation of policy leaders. And we work in different policy areas, from criminal justice reform, like I mentioned, to immigration, to education, and labor. And so I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you so much. Shondine, if you can introduce yourself.
Shondine Herrera, Yanashia, Tachini Nishla, Nakai Bahe Bashishim, but any Dashiche, Nakai Bahe Dashinale, Ahot Ao Edinet Nishla, Auto Zebian Sky Danasha. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here today. My name is Shondine Herrera. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. I live in Monument Valley, and I currently work with the Ojito chapter a Lead for America Hometown Fellow. Right now, my work is primarily focused on COVID relief efforts in my community, and I'm currently a Utah Lead volunteer with the Navajo and Hopi Families COVID Relief Effort.
Thank you so much for telling us just a little bit more about yourselves. Let's get started with some of our questions. So when people think about civic engagement, it's often in terms of voting. How does your work connect to civic engagement? And let's start with Shandine.
Yeah, so when I think of civic engagement, I simply think of being a good community member, being active in your community and being a catalyst for change. Voting is a large part of that, but it's important to also recognize that there are so many other levels to it and so many other ways to show up for your community. And so some of the ways that I have been showing up for my community here in Monument Valley is first, I decided to come home after graduating Duke. And that was a really big decision for me because it's really difficult to return to the reservation, right after graduation. But it's something I felt like I needed to do for my people. And so with my chapter, once I started my fellowship, I joined our community land use planning committee. So I helped rewrite a lot of policies internally and also just encourage a more efficient approach to community projects. This is a really important committee for us, and it has long just not been very functional. So I'm doing my best to kind of get things going here. I also conducted a 4-month-long listening tour in my community to gain a deeper sense of community needs and aspirations. And I presented these findings to my chapter leadership to guide the policy process and ensure that they're aware of the needs and aspirations of their constituents. I've also done a lot of advocacy around the census. I received a microgrant and was able to plan and host a census education event here in Monument Valley. So this was an event where we had community members come in and learn about how to fill out the census and why it's so important for our community. We also invited organizations so folks could come in and sign up to be a census enumerator. And also we invited the Rural Utah Project, who have done a significant amount of work around voter registration. And so folks could come in, sign up to work for the Census Bureau, learn about the census process, and make sure that they're registered to vote, and also sign up for a Google Plus code, which is really important for our communities here because we don't have physical addresses. So this was a really fun one-stop shop type of event that I was really happy to put on. And additionally, since March, my primary focus has been COVID relief. Right now, I'm serving as a Utah lead, and so I work to coordinate food and supply distribution here in Monument Valley, but also surrounding Navajo communities. And this photo here is just a shot of our amazing team here in Monument Valley who spend endless hours out doing home deliveries to families in quarantine and to our elders. So that's been my primary focus for the past 6 months.
Wow, that's a lot of work, and I can definitely see how it all comes back to voting. Definitely the work that you're doing is critical. Thank you for sharing that. Isabel.
So just going off what Shandine just said, there are so many levers to how we are civically engaged, and yes, voting is one of them. But what happens after voting? Our jobs don't just stop there. It's keeping accountable our elected officials, especially people who make us promises and win our votes. It's about keeping those people accountable to us. I have some photos that I shared with in this presentation with Representative Presley and Representative Holland, just showing as an example what it is to work with people who come from communities like me and who want to hear policy ideas from people from the community. And this is why we need to have more representation, because when we have this representation, it makes it so much easier to get make the change that we want to see. Generally, policy is a really hard area to get into. Historically, it's been older white males that have been dominating this area, and that's just not acceptable anymore because that's not what our communities look like. And so through my work with Next 100, I've been able to be so lucky to work with powerful women like them to see the change that I want to see.
Wow, both of your work sounds like you're addressing the issues that we see before getting able to vote, like being able to access it and creating opportunities. And then also what we should, as civically minded people, continue to do afterwards. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And we definitely can see how it is directly connected to civic engagement. But what I want to know is actually what inspired you to start doing this work? What inspired you to do the work that you do? Let's go with Isabel.
So my work was inspired from my lived experience. My mom, who is my hero, unfortunately, when I was young, served several years in a state prison. But through that, she learned several valuable lessons. One, making her education a priority, as well as raising me. And so she did exactly that by going back to school and going to law school and becoming an attorney at our reintegration program at our tribe and helping other Creek citizens with their criminal legal cases. And of course, that trickled down to me and wanting to make a difference for my community. This was me at my master's graduation and just feeling so proud to come from what I've come from. And she inspires me every day. I mean, how couldn't she?
I definitely hear that. I see the pride in that picture and the excitement. Thank you so much for sharing that. Shantine, can you talk a little bit about what really inspired you?
So I have a really deep sense of community and just a strong tie to the land that I come from. And so I often think about the beauty of the land that I live on and how thankful I am for my ancestors who protected this community for us. And so, you know, as a child, and here's a photo from my house, so here in Monument Valley, and, you know, it's a very rural, small community. There's just pockets of, you know, homesteads throughout, and I think that's the beauty of it. But as a child, I remember going to chapter meetings with my mother and my grandmother and hearing some of the issues that were being discussed. And, you know, these were issues with lack of running water, lack of electricity, the dire need for infrastructure, food insecurity, and the list went on. And so as I grew older and continued attending these meetings, you know, I realized that we were talking about the same issues. And so, you know, now you add in broadband access, you know, the disparities between education access, job access. And so as I started my educational journey, I kept these community issues at my forefront. And, you know, for me personally, it's been incredibly frustrating to realize the plethora of issues that continue to exist and the challenges our people go through on a daily basis simply to survive. And so, you know, this has been a huge source of motivation and inspiration for me. And in the various roles that I am, I do my absolute best to be an advocate and bring, you know, awareness, but also bring in resources that our community needs. And in this, you know, I utilize my resources and my networks to continue doing good for my community.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It sounds like for both of you that your community, the way we grow up really influences the work that you two do, but even in ourselves, we can reflect on our work and see that a lot of our upbringings, those values we're taught are reflected in the choices that we make. So in order to see this change that we want, right, we want to see this change in our communities. Why is the access to vote such an important issue right now for Native communities? If we can go ahead and start with Shantine here.
So, there are so many important policy decisions that are being made by leadership at all levels, whether that be tribal, state, or federal level. These decisions directly impact Native communities, whether, we see it up front or if it happens behind closed doors. So, it's important to vote and to elect leaders that understand the weight of the decisions that they're making, and understand how some of these policy decisions may inadvertently affect Indian country. And so I've personally seen a shift even within my own community, where more people are realizing the power in their own voices, and realizing that they can play an important role in the policy making process and the political process. And so I see more people wanting to vote, and now there's another barrier, right? So now we have people who are excited, who understand what's at stake, and who want to vote. And now we face here, especially in Monument Valley, just knowledge of, when is the last day I can, vote? Where are the election polls? We have a huge issue here with access to broadband, and we're living in a digital divide. And so just getting basic information is a huge barrier for us. With that comes the issues around a valid ID and, a physical address to even register to vote. Most of our community is still dirt roads. So, we don't have physical addresses, which makes it more difficult to register and to prove our residency here in Utah, especially. And that's why the work of organizations like Rural Utah Project, who have been assigning Google Plus codes to homes throughout San Juan County, is so important. So, we can identify, our own people and make sure that they're voting in these elections. So, it's important that we have this access to vote, but it's even more important that we understand what that access looks like. Because, the outcomes of these votes will impact our people. And, I strongly believe that protecting our right to vote means protecting our future.
Wow, that's very powerful. Protecting our right to vote is protecting our future. Thank you, Shondine. I really appreciate that. So Isabel, let's talk a little bit about your work. How and why is access to voting such an important issue right now?
Yeah, so just with the 100-year anniversary of white women being able to vote, there was still so many discrepancy left out. Right now, we're still in those times. From in the beginning when voting only for white males with land, then it turned to women, then women of color. Today, we're still dealing with those Jim Crow laws where people with criminal records are having barriers to voting. All over the US, there's different laws for people who have been previously incarcerated. Some people are able to vote once they pay off their fines and fees or off probation. Others have to go and petition the governor to get their right back to vote. And that's just not acceptable anymore, because once a person does their time, they should be able to be civically engaged just like the rest of us, because what's happening in their community is going to equally impact them as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like formerly incarcerated people don't have the same voting capabilities as other citizens as well. And that does definitely make sense why it's important to access voting, is to ensure that you have elected officials that will support you and uphold your community, because they really do make policies and changes that can impair you as a citizen. Thank you for putting that into context and definitely making that more clear for us. So now that we all know what inspires you to do this work and why it's so important, I can't help to think about all the labor that you both put into it and some of the barriers that you as change makers may face. Shondine, you have a very unique situation while working on the Navajo Nation. Can you tell me just a little bit more about what some of those unique challenges are? What do you face while you're doing this work?
Yeah, so for me, the number one challenge I have faced is access to internet. We're living in a major digital divide. Only 40% So 41% of people living on tribal lands, which is roughly 1.6 million people, do not have access to fixed broadband, which is high-speed internet. And so, you know, when you think about that statistic, so many people are literally being left in the dark. You know, they don't have access to information. And so here on Navajo, and especially here in my community, you know, it's really difficult to access internet. You know, sometimes I have to travel anywhere from 2 to 3 hours round trip to get on a Zoom call like this, or, you know, to participate in a webinar or to participate in an online course. And so I've seen firsthand how, you know, this really impacts our people. You know, so many of our community members are forced to pass up educational opportunities or job opportunities because they don't have access to internet. And for folks that do, you know, it's really expensive. And so, you know, I feel that this has really personally impacted me, and just the level of planning and strategizing, you know, how am I going to participate in certain things? You know, I need to travel to access internet. And that's something I took for granted, you know, while at Duke. You know, internet was everywhere. And I think that's a thing a lot of people don't realize, is that, you know, on Navajo and all across Indian country, there's a huge digital divide that, you know, continues to play a big role in, you know, why a lot of issues are existing in our communities. And so, you know, along with that, you know, I feel it's personally really important for me to share the work that I do, whether that be, you know, doing calls like this, responding to interviews, posting on social media, because, you know, sometimes that's nearly impossible when I don't have access to internet. And, you know, I think that's that plays a big role in why a lot of times in Indian country, we're working in silos. You know, we could be and we should be working together and collaborating on community issues. But, you know, it's so difficult when you don't have that constant and reliable access to communication. And so that has been, you know, my biggest challenge working back here in my community.
Yeah, that idea of being left in the dark is very scary. It's scary to think about not being able to keep up in conversations, especially when you're working towards the same goal and it just is happening in a vacuum, in a silo, like you mentioned, when really all of us together, if we had that access, would create a really strong case for some of the things that we are experiencing in Indian country. And just an FYI, Indian country simply means the reservations or the areas that Native nations are. So you might hear those terms thrown around a little bit, but I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you so much, Shondine. It's sometimes hard to talk about the issues that we face while doing the work that we do. Thank you so much. So next, I want to ask Isabel, the challenges that many activists face while doing their work is important to understand. If we don't understand the changes, how can we truly be allies? So I want to think about all of, you know, the work that you're doing and how it's sometimes not discussed in connection to civic engagement. And it's even less talked about, this idea of mass incarceration, or the reality of mass incarceration within Native American communities. Can you speak to why aren't these issues within Indian country being talked about?
It's a great question, and why I'm so thankful to share this platform with everybody, because my whole issue has been bringing this awareness to people, especially in Indian country, so that they know we have an issue going on with mass incarceration within our communities. And just bouncing off what Shondine just said is how we do work in silos, where we should be working in connections with our issues. How mass incarceration is connected to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls issue too, because that same system that isn't doing anything for our Native women is also doing a very good job at incarcerating our people. In the federal system, Native men are incarcerated 6 times the rate of that of white men. 4 times the rate of white men. And Native women are incarcerated at 6 times the rate of white women. So as you can see, we are overrepresented in our federal prison system, and that's just not okay with me anymore. Following with my work here, I've been trying to find ways to better express that to our communities so that they understand the gravity, because this doesn't just impact the person, it impacts their children, their mothers, their fathers, also their ability to find employment, housing, voting, like I said a little bit ago. All of these issues are interconnected. And we need to ensure that we're taking account for our people. Even so, in these times right now with COVID, people are in there dying too. And with lack of healthcare, being in close quarters, I just can't think of, all the families that are missing out on their ones. And so I just hope that people check us out and continue to educate themselves.
Yeah, so many people in Indian country and in a larger scale aren't having these conversations because from those graphs you showed us, that there's a lot of evidence in there that does make us feel uncomfortable. And these topics can make people feel uncomfortable because these are going against ideas that we've always had about, or misconceptions that we've always had about incarcerated people. So I appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes I know it's not easy to bring up these conversations in different spaces. So thank you. The special relationship between really Native communities in the federal government and state governments definitely complicates lots when it comes to being civically engaged. So thank you. I want us to now bring it back to thinking about the title of our program, which is Youth in Action, Conversations About Our Future. What does the future of civic engagement look like to you? And what do you want to see for the future? Isabel?
So our future, I have so much hope for our future as an optimist, just thinking about the youth, and just reiterating that I know our youth are out there doing things now. It's not about getting them excited to do it. I am seeing them in the trenches, doing what they need to do now. But it's about, are we supporting them? Are we honoring them? Are we serving them and letting them have a voice at the table when they do come into these spaces? Because it's not enough to say, oh, the youth need to be more involved when we are involved and we are coming into these spaces. But it's about letting us take the reins too. Also with voting in the future, I just really hope that we're not digressing and that we're progressing with making it easier to vote for all people, for those who were formerly incarcerated, for our immigrant brothers and sisters. There's so many people still disenfranchised by voting that we should be progressing, and definitely in our future that I see that as our potential.
Amazing, thank you. Shondine, what does the future of civic engagement look like to you? What are your hopes?
Yeah, so, I hope more people realize the power in their voices and in sharing their stories. As you can see, both Isabel and I are, motivated by our lived experience and are able to, do the work we do to the best of our ability because we know our communities best.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I hope that more of our youth, more of our, brothers and sisters across Indian country will become active in their communities, more voting, bringing meaningful programs to our communities, and collectively rebuilding our communities the way we envision them. And I just want to add too that, I hope that we can progress and move away from this idea of politics, because I have seen how that leads so many people to become disengaged, because we don't see how we fit in that process, or we may not see how, we could impact change in that process. So, I think that more people can see civic engagement, that it's really just about being a good community member. And lastly, to just echo Isabel, I hope that our youth will continue to be the strong advocates that they are, and continue to return home to rebuild their communities, and that, you know, we give them the platforms that they deserve and we continue to uplift each other's work.
Oh, that's amazing. It sounds like, echoing what we talked about earlier, that this idea of collaboration is really core at the future of civic engagement in Indian country. Thank you so much for helping us re-envision what our future and the future of civic engagement could look like. I think it's important to hear how the future can look different, but these futures can exist together. We're going to open up the Q&A for everybody to start asking our amazing panelists questions that we will be answering. So it looks like I already have one. So, question for both of you. What are some next steps people can take to support you, the work you're doing? How can people be good allies, native or non-native?
So for me and my work, I would encourage everybody to go to the next100.org website. We are putting up great things for people to read. We do engage with our community with murals. We do hold youth events. And so there's ways to get in touch with us and continue this work. Policy work isn't an individual person thing. It's a movement. It requires many different people, many different voices. And so getting involved is definitely a big help.
Shandine, did you want to add a little bit onto that?
Yeah, you know, I would just like to add that, you know, I really encourage people to do their part in educating themselves on what is going on in Indian country, and, you know, what are issues in our communities right now. You know, there are really good native news outlets out there, Indian Country Today being one of them. You know, so just, you know, take a look at where you're getting your news and your information, and just diversify it a little bit would be my, you know, biggest piece of advice. And, you know, to just find ways to become involved, be an advocate, be an ally, use your platforms, and spread awareness in your networks. You know, I think that's really important. And just want to quickly plug, if you would like to support the work I'm doing with COVID relief, and learn more about us, you can visit NavajoHopi-Solidarity.org. And just, you know, we're going on 6 months now, just providing relief to people here on Navajo and our neighbors in Hopi.
Thank you so much for that. That actually answers another question that we had. But this next question, and I think both of you will love this question because I do. This comes from Tracy. What is your favorite example from your work that demonstrates that one person, one voice can truly make a difference?
Okay, let me take a stab at this. So, you know, I think that advocating for yourself is really important. You know, when I wanted to come home and there wasn't necessarily a position for me, you know, I went to my chapter leaders and, you know, shared why I wanted to come home and how important it was to start reintegrating our youth, and especially Native women, back into, you know, our government structures. And so, you know, me as one person in my community was able to create this fellowship and this partnership between Lead for America and our Ojeto chapter, you know, that has now led me to be able to come home for 2 years to do the work that I'm doing. And so, you know, that speaks volumes. You know, when you are passionate about something, you will always find a way to, you know, get to the point where you need to be for your community. And so I just encourage a lot of youth to, you know, whatever you're passionate about, wherever you see yourself, there is always people who are going to support you, and that you just have to be a relentless advocate. And just, you know, I think that there has been and it's a domino effect, right? So the more youth we see coming home and the work that I'm doing, lets other youth know that it's possible, but it also lets our leadership know that, we need to start involving our youth because, they're pretty amazing. They can do a lot for our community. And so, for me, that's the example that, that I could think of.
Yeah, I like that answer. It's like, if there's a will, there's a way, and I'm going to get it done. Just watch me. All right. Isabel?
So, thinking about that question, I have an answer on the smaller scale. In my work, before getting into this advocacy, I was really ashamed to share my story and what had happened to me and my family, just because it was such a taboo topic to talk about in our community, and still is for a lot of kids who go to school and don't talk about what happened to their parents. But it was one day when I was working, I heard a child tell his story, and he was like 10 or 11, about his mother being incarcerated. And although that was to change, hopefully to change laws that were going on in Oklahoma, it made me change my route, because hearing his story was so inspirational. How a little boy can go out on stage and share what happened to him. I felt compelled to do the same thing. And so that was my kind of life-changing thing on a smaller scale.
Yeah, something small can, what is it, a spark can ignite a fire. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you both so much. I have another pretty good question. I wasn't doubting, but I like this one. This is for Sean Dean. Robin would like to ask you if you could elaborate on the physical address and the voter registration issues and Google's efforts to help Navajo and those living in rural communities overcome that. If you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so, a part of the issue with not having physical addresses is the difficulties with getting a license. I live in the state of Utah, but I have an Arizona license because it was just easier to get. And so that's, a lot of folks deal with that issue. So a lot of folks in Monument Valley in particular, because we live right on the Arizona-Utah border, get their mail in Arizona, but they live in Utah. So there's a lot of these small issues that a lot of people don't know how to address, so they just don't want to deal with it, right? So they're like, oh, I don't have a good address, so I'm just not going to bother. So, what Rural Utah Project has been doing, and I think it's amazing, is that they've been going out to homes in San Juan County on the Navajo Nation, and they essentially go to every home, or if it looks like someone lives there, they will visit you, and they will sign you up with a Google Plus code. And so Google Plus code is, just a code that you can locate on Google Maps, and it will show exactly where that home is. And so this is really great because a lot of the times when you're registering to vote, you have to prove your residency. And because there's just, it's very rural, there's a lot of overlap between Arizona and Utah, especially in San Juan County. And so a lot of times people don't even know what side of the border they're on. So with the Google Plus code, they can say, here's my home, it's in Utah, register me to vote. And they will use that Google Plus code as a physical address. And so that's been really important. And we saw the effects of that in the 2018 San Juan County elections, where Rural Utah Project registered over 1,200 people in San Juan County, Navajo people who were not registered to vote. And because they got registered and were able to vote, now for the first time ever, we have a Navajo majority San Juan County Commission. And that, speaks to how important it is to make sure our people understand that there is an election, that they, it's important they participate at every level, right? So even county commissions. And so, that really played a role. And, that I know that will also impact larger elections at the state and the federal level. So that is some of the work that's been going on here in rural Utah, and that I have seen just really make a big impact for us.
Yeah, thank you. Explaining those subtle nuances that we experience when living in very rural environments is something important in this dialogue. So my next question, and I think we have time for a couple more. So the next question is, what are some common mistakes you see with cultural institutions, or institutions at large really, that they make when it comes to civic engagement? So when have you seen some, or what are some of the common mistakes that we see these institutions making when it comes to Native civic engagement?
I think one of the issues that happens is that we get siloed into one issue or what they hear about the most. When we're so diverse, like there's over 500 tribes here, and we're all dealing with, some may be similar, but also very different issues. And so you can't just group us all together and say, here, let's just fix this and everything's gonna be okay. That's just not how our communities work.
Yeah, it sounds like a blanket statement is made. So for instance, the concern around broadband, these rural Indian country residents don't have broadband. This is the one solution for everyone, when everything is it looks different, it is different. The state, federal laws, there's so many things that complicate it that one solution is not going to work for everybody.
Just to build off of that, just how Shandine is experiencing the digital divide from being on her reservation. Like my tribe in Oklahoma, we're spread out in rural and also cities. Like our land, and just recently the Supreme Court ruled that we are a reservation, and that we're always been a reservation, but we're not experiencing those digital divides just because of where our land is spread out and how we are both coming from city people and rural country people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You guys, it's our final question. You ready? Okay. What is the best way to hold our elected officials accountable? That's a big one, but what are some of the best ways or the most effective ways you've found to hold the elected officials accountable to us, their constituents?
I'll go. So one way that I've found that's been effective is cultivating a relationship with our elected officials, and just more than beyond sending out an email or a phone call. Like those are very effective, especially if you have your federal elected officials. But when you're going to the events and being active in the community setting, that's where those relationships really come in handy. And when you get to that first name basis, it makes it a lot easier to build trust so that you can get the things that you want done for your community across.
Yeah, those relationships definitely are critical. Shandine?
Yeah, that is a really great point. And I think that, especially here, because I am in a really small community, it's even more so important to make those relationships with tribal and, state elected officials. It's really common during, election year to see a lot of these leaders come into our communities, and then you never see them again, right? So, it's part of our job to make sure that, we remind them what they came in and told us that, they were going to prioritize with our issues. And so, that advocacy plays a big role in that. And it may be really uncomfortable, to go to a chapter meeting or to go to, a county commission meeting and really just state how you're feeling and how you feel these officials are leaving your community in the dark. But, you know, it's something that's really necessary. And I feel like when you do foster those relationships, you know, you see the impact in your communities, especially on the tribal and state level, because we feel the impacts of, you know, the policy decisions that are made even more so in smaller communities.
Wow. Thank you both for this amazing conversation, your time. So thank you so much, Shondine and Isabel, for joining us today. For our virtual attendees, learn more about their amazing work by following them on social media and checking out their websites. This time I would like to say thank you to everyone who has worked on our first ever Youth in Action series, our participants, but also those that came before us to even make this possible. Native civic engagement wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the Native activists and their allies who fought for equity and social justice through education, inspiration, and empowerment. I encourage you to check out our website, americanindian.si.edu/NK360 to learn more about our programs, access our educational resources, and sign up for our virtual field trips. Please be sure to check out our YouTube page to view other museum programs we have. And I would like to say a special thank you to the National Council of the National Museum of the American Indian for their generous support of this brand new program. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and have a great day.